Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Latishuma. I am online managing editor for the Eurasia division of the Voice of America. I spend a lot of time reporting on Balkans from early 90s, and Montenegro in particular, for a number of media, including the Associated Press, Voice of America. And I'm very honored to participate in a discussion with Ambassador Darmanović, who I believe is one of the leading experts when it comes to relations among the ethnic communities, various legalese and social issues in the Balkans. He's a renowned university professor, and I think one of the better representatives here, at least when it comes to the chess. His bio is on the Rumi Forum's website, and you'll find out that he is a candidate for Master in Chess, which makes some of us very proud. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to the Rumi Forum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
When we speak about ethnic relations in the Balkans, us reporters who had a chance to report from war, the words we would touch to ethnic would be generally either cleansing or conflict, or in the best case scenario, reconciliation. Montenegro, however, gets a lot of praise from international community for achieving some kind of a harmony among its ethnic communities. Montenegro's ethnic structure is very complex. Can you give us a little introduction about what is the structure of the ethnic composition of Montenegro right now?
Okay, thank you once again for giving me an opportunity to speak in the Rumi Forum. Having in mind the nature and orientation of this NGO think tank, I will try to explain these ethnic structure, ethnic issues, identity tolerance model of Montenegro, which is recognized by many, and what is very important by European Union, who is very probably next member we are, not immediately, not tomorrow, but in the foreseeable period of time. And we are probably the only country in the region where all what happened in the 90s, all Balkan calamities with the breakup of Yugoslavia, didn't, let's say, touch us in a way like the others, because there was no any kind of a war in the country. We preserved ourselves of these worst events that can happen to one nation or one country. It was not quite easy because Montenegro is like a small Yugoslavia by ethnic structure. And what is a unique feature of Montenegro is that unlike of many others in the region aside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are the country without majority ethnic group. I mean majority above 50%. It was not like that until 1991, until Yugoslavia was alive. But in all these tragic events in the 90s, because ethnicity on the basis of our constitution is a free choice of any human being, so you can claim to be whatever, we experienced a kind of a switch in ethnic identities, and at the last census of 2011 we ended up as a country without ethnic majority. So we can organize ourselves only as a civic state. Montenegro cannot be actually a state based on the ethnic exclusiveness of any ethnic group. The structure by numbers is the following. There are around 44% of Montenegrins, declared Montenegrins. There is almost 30%, slightly less than 30% of Serbs. What constitutes, in religious terms, Orthodox, pretty big majority in the country, over 70%, 72%. Then we have 11 and something percent of the Bosniak and Muslims in the country. This community actually divided themselves by labor. It was one ethnic group before. but I will explain how it happened. Someone called them Bosniaks now, someone Muslims by ethnicity, but it is pretty much similar ethnic group or the same. We have slightly less than 5% of Albanians. Albanians are a pretty unique ethnic group in Montenegro because, frankly speaking, they are maybe in that territory before all of us. I don't know, I'm not historian, but most probably. And it is the only non-Slav speaking ethnic group in the country. It is the only group with a totally different language, you know. Let's say that we in Serbia, Croatia, Montenegro and Bosnia speak the same language. We call it different now. Montenegrin, Bosniaks, Serbian, Croatian, but it's pretty much the same language. We can pretty much good understand Macedonians and Slovenians. These are Slav languages and pretty similar. But Albanians are completely different language group. And we have some small percent of Croats in the Bay of Kotor region. It was not easy to manage the country with this pretty complex ethnic structure to avoid all calamities that passed through the Balkan Peninsula or former Yugoslavia in the 90s, where the most tragic and terrible war after World War II happened in Europe. But Montenegro has pretty good tradition of the ethnic tolerance and ethnic relations between ethnic groups, even from the time of the kingdom and princedom in the 19th century. And we didn't have problems like between Serbia and Kosovo now that any part of the country claimed to be a different state or something like that. Additionally, constitutions from the 1992 on pointed out always a kind so-called affirmative action, actually protection of the minority in the in the sphere of political representation. So we have always had a special arrangement for the Albanian community, granting them 5 guaranteed seats in the Montenegrin parliament out of 81. What was achieved by special electoral techniques that is not so difficult to be organized. And now in the last constitution of 2007, as other minorities also claim to be specially represented, these 5 seats will be distributed according to the electoral results and also among other minority groups. This solution has always been praised and supported by the relevant European bodies like OSCE, like Council of Europe, and like a Venice Commission whose member I am, the expert body of Council of Europe that assists new democracies in the institutional building. Relative ethnic tolerance and ethnic, not to say harmony, but pretty good relations served us very well in solving the most tricky, the most difficult issue we faced in our modern history. It is the issue of the statehood. Montenegro actually is almost the only one country in the Balkans that solved its statehood issue simply by vote and without any single incident or conflict over this event or achievement. Something similar happened to Macedonia in 1991, mostly thanks to the historical figure as it was Macedonia late President Kiro Grigorov, but it was a totally different context. Macedonia, after all, in the subsequent phases, experienced some problems and hopefully resolved it in a pretty good way by the Ohrid agreement. Montenegrin statehood has always been the issue, where Montenegro does belong. And this issue has always been opened and reopened in the context of the big crisis, international crisis. Montenegro was the only small point in the Balkans that from the end of the 17th century has always been free under its hereditary dynasty. And this status lasted until the end of the World War I. Regimes changed, theocracy, princedom, kingdom, but country has always been free, and in 1878 recognized by Berlin Congress as a international nation, recognized nation, 27th in that time of the world. In the context of World War I, Montenegro lost statehood, was attached to Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and in the base it was pretty much arrangement of the unitary state. Montenegro actually ceased to exist. Then it is revamped as a semi-state in Tito's Yugoslavia as one of the equal six federal republics. Then in the context of breakup of Yugoslavia in 1992, decided to stay with Serbia in one state of the rump Yugoslavia called Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, what was pretty strange arrangement between 80 times bigger brother and 80 times smaller brother, or younger, or what do you want. This arrangement was crashed together with the fall of the Milosevic regime, and the new arrangement was made between Serbia and Montenegro, Confederative of Union, Serbia and Montenegro, that some people called Solania because of the decisive influence of EU, that time Commissioner for Foreign Policy, Javier Solana. It was actually the agreement between two democratic governments, late Djindjić's government in Serbia and Đukanović in Montenegro, on kind of a very loose union. And finally, after actually almost a century, Montenegro decided to revamp it as a independent nation. This issue was complicated because of the identity problems, especially among Orthodox population. Montenegrins, the Orthodox population is divided on Montenegrins and Serbs with completely different vision of what country should be. Pro-Serbian population actually claimed that the country would be part of the united country with Serbia, or federal country. The idea what was legitimate. It is as legitimate as independent as in the idea of independence. And majority of Montenegrins claimed that the country should be independent as all other Yugoslav republics after the breakup of Yugoslavia. And maybe someone would say that independence was more favorable option because it is natural. But you know, the population who advocated federations were not terrorists, or they didn't violate constitution, they only wanted to stay with Serbia. And we had to solve the issue in the proper way. And it was solved by this referendum of 2006. What has already been put in the textbooks because of the very interesting features. One of them is the decision of EU to impose on us very strange majority of 55+%, not 50+1. And whoever wants to win with the independence idea has had to achieve by the electorate more than 55% of the votes. What actually happened, but result was 55.5 against 44.5. So the country was pretty much divided over a crucial issue in its recent history. It reflects also a kind of religious issues among Orthodoxy, not among others. So we belong to the Orthodox country that had two Orthodox churches. It's not so quite frequent feature. You can find it in Ukraine. It was in Macedonian case, but Macedonia pretty luckily solved the issue even before, not like us. And we will probably be the Orthodox country having two Orthodox churches, While in Orthodoxy is mostly there is some pretty much strange doctrine, one state, one church. I, being pretty much liberal in my understanding of those kinds of things, I am very much attached to the principle, let's say, in this country, that as many believers, as many churches. You know, but in Orthodoxy it is like that. So it was a tradition from the even Russian medieval period. So Montenegro has always had to manage somehow this pretty complicated structure, and also to find a way to deal with the neighbors, because our neighbors are in many aspects are not less complicated than us. Croatia experienced war. Bosnia experienced the most tragic war in the recent history. Slovenia had also troubles with gaining independence. Macedonia even now has many problems. We as a country, being a part of the rump Yugoslavia, made in 1991 not pretty shameful action against Croatia in Dubrovnik in the context of a war, but it was luckily our last participation in that kind of a conflict. And in the whole region it was necessary to re-establish good relations. And finally we succeeded to do that. And I can say that today Montenegro has excellent relations with all of its neighbors. No matter we had a kind of a dispute with Serbia over recognizing Kosovo, but we cooperate in the region maybe never better. I don't want to say better than in Yugoslav time, but maybe never better than in the last, I don't know, 2 decades or more. We are very faithful and good partners in the US Adriatic Charter with Macedonia, Albania, Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. This international organization or charter served us very well in the NATO integration process. And even we went to the point that countries which some of them had war among themselves, now sent a joint battalion of the officers to Afghanistan, to ISAF mission, to train Afghan military police after only 20 years of the breakup of the country. So it's a kind of achievement among us. Slovenia today for us is a very important NATO ally. Actually, it's a contact country for Montenegro in its NATO drive. Croatia is our principal partner in our EU integration process because they've just finished, they've just been embraced, and they are helping us a lot in this issue. We cooperate excellent with Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina in the US Adriatic Charter, and in many aspects would like to see our Macedonian friends to resolve the issue with Greece about the name, what is not easy, but we'll hope that it will not last too long. We try to help Bosnia, both parts. We have good relations with both parts, Republika Srpska and Federation. But it's not always quite easy because Bosnia is a complicated state. State has 127 ministers, what is pretty complicated structure. I very often call Bosnia Belgium without money by how country is organized. And we have in spite of the fact that we left the Federation Serbia Montenegro 2006, in spite of these tensions about Kosovo recognition, we have our Serbian friends as a biggest trade partner. We cooperate pretty good in the international scene. There are some unresolved disputes internally. Serbia claimed to the rights for the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Serbian population, what is more or less okay. But Montenegro, the smallest of all Yugoslav republics, size of Connecticut, population of DC, territory of 5.6 thousand of square miles, and 620,000 of people, of the population. Rest itself not only in peace, but in pretty good drive, in a pretty good tracks to EU and NATO integrations. We are in the 3rd year of our membership action plan in joining NATO. We will not be invited in Chicago, as you all know. There will be no invitations in Chicago, but we expect further progress. And with EU, we are entering the last phase, very last phase, that will be long, probably 5 to 6 years. It is accession talks. As Vice President Biden said once, last 10 yards in footballs are always most difficult. So it is what we expect now in negotiation with Brussels administration. It is complicated as such. It is a brief picture of today's Montenegro. I probably have not said many things that I should say, and it is not easy in the brief introduction. But I hope that we will discuss many other issues in the Q&A session with our moderator, with you, and be free not to insist only on Montenegrin affairs. I am very open to speak about regional affairs and maybe some other things that you are interested in about our region. So, thank you. I hope that I was not quite long in my first speaking session.
Just to remind everybody that you can ask questions at any point in time. Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned at one point that Montenegro has no dominant ethnic group at the moment. There's no majority, there is no ethnic majority. Is that a strength or weakness?
This switch in the ethnic structure happened during the 90s. In the last census of Yugoslavia, the ethnic structure in Montenegro was 62% of Montenegrins and 9% of Serbs. Now we have 44% of Montenegrins and almost 30% of Serbs. Nationalistic revolution of Serbian President Slobodan Milošević and nationalistic movement, Serbian nationalistic movement of that time, has been pretty much embraced in Montenegro, and opened or reopened some old issues of what Montenegrins really are. Because some Serbian nationalists has always claimed that Montenegrins are actually invented nation, that is not, that actually don't exist, it is just Serbs, who was granted by Tito's Yugoslavia with Montenegrinhood, what's not true. But this question became one of the dominant in the 90s. It's a fact now. It is not to ask anybody what's his ethnic identity, or is in this identity has any political identity. It's in a free country, that's it. And we don't think that the fact that Montenegro doesn't have a majority ethnic group is a weakness. It served us very well to organize or to write our constitutions strictly as a constitution of the civic state. There is only in a preamble that Montenegrin people created its state in the centuries-long battles for freedom always, and that's it. It is preamble, no constitutional chapters. All other organization of division of power, institutions, human rights, minority rights, there is a long chapter on minority rights, is written as in any civic state. I think it will serve well to our economy if we will be less burdened by the ethnicity. So there has always been strong theory in international relations that states who are consisted mostly of one nation, like Poland or I don't know, there are some other examples, are happier and easier to manage. But I don't think that history proved that claim, that statement. maybe this country is the best example, and many others. So if some country can do well in the other fields and in the other achievements, ethnic structure is not for good or for bad, it is just like that.
A long history, or a brief history, if you wish, if you look at a longer span of union or living in union with Serbia, has left certain consequences. And right now in Montenegro, you spoke about affirmative action for the minorities, but within the Serbian populace in Montenegro, some of them argue that they should be treated and given rights as minority. Some of them believe Serbs are a constituent ethnic group in Montenegro. How much of an issue that is right now?
This approach has been definitely abandoned recently. So Serbian political representatives of the pro-Serbian parties definitely claim that majorities in the country should not be, some ethnic groups that exceed 15% should not be treated as minority groups. And I think it makes the whole situation much easier. And it is quite logical approach, because when you invent all of these things like affirmative actions and for minorities, theoreticians and even in practice have in mind so-called small minorities, who, let's say, cannot achieve representation in the parliament in the normal competition. But you know, ethnic groups that can reach political representation easily through mainstream parties, through multinational parties, through ethnic parties. However, they don't need to claim these minority rights. And it is logical also in the other sense. Although we call our languages now differently, we understand each other very well. The Albanians are the only group that really has that kind of a problem. They really need schools and high schools and even some university branches in their language. It is normal. And rest of us, we can put BSCM, Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian, Montenegrin, but we understand each other every word that we speak. So it is. I think that it is not any. It will be an issue maybe in the I don't know, in the how it will be organized, the textbooks for in the educational system, what will be the emphasis on, and so on, but not as anymore as a minority status. So it is not an issue anymore as a minority status. Serbs are almost 30% of the population.
So if I can summarize, you're saying peace, stability, development, democratic development, both in Montenegro and in the region, are somehow preconditions for ethnic harmony of ethnic communities. To what extent job creation and economic revitalization is essential for ethnic harmonization? Because we are having a group of devastated economies right now in the Balkans that are not connected anymore. How big of an issue that is? Very much, very much. Everybody is happier with a good economy and strong economy, and less thinking about which church is devoted, which ethnicity belongs, and is all percentages in ethnic balances are like they should be, and so on. By the way, in this country it's not always easy to understand our models with ethnicities, because this country is created on the civilian principle, not ethnic principle. But Balkan nations and many European nations are ethnic nations, and very often we have these claims that ethnicity comes first. You know how the Bosnia is organized after the Dayton Agreement. Belgium, Switzerland has very tricky models of the organization of the country, and many others. But everything is much easier with a successful economy. I am afraid that we in the Balkans, all of us, in the
Western Balkans, and not only Western Balkans, will face some not quite pleasant and easy moments with the economic crisis of European economic crisis in the 2012, and I hope not longer. And it is not just the best time to be expected. I don't belong to the persons who expect any kind of breakup or fall of the European idea in the European Union. I think the whole project is much more serious to be just fell apart. But some difficult moments are maybe ahead of us. It's not quite unimaginable for me that some countries might leave the Eurozone, or what will reflect to all of us. Nobody will be just isolated island and can say, okay, we don't care what you Europeans do with your economies.
Questions? Please.
Assam Altai from Iraq. Question I have is, do you think it's the communities that decided to sort of forego the war or go into war or go into violence back in the early 90s, or is it leadership that actually driven that? And the second question, if you don't mind, being from Iraq, do you have any observation on what is happening in Iraq and how to avert a possible second attempt at civil war?
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you ask me to answer simply, there are not communities but leaders. But things are never just simple as that. Leaders for that kind of an undertaking always have to attract masses and to reshape the mindset of the masses in the very nationalistic way. You know, German people was not guilty for the 30s and 40s. But without German people, it was not possible. Not only Nazi party could have done it. It was the same in the Balkans. Yugoslavia was probably in many ways unique in the, if I can say, family of the communist countries or socialist countries. We have always been much more soft, not to say liberal, soft one-party regime than what was in the Soviet Empire. And after all, we have never belonged to them, but to the non-aligned movement. For my generation, it was always much bigger deal to beat Soviets in basketball than Americans, for example. Legitimation of the Tito's Yugoslavia was pretty much not belonging to the Soviet Empire. And being far ahead, even economically, than the Soviet zone, Yugoslavia was not predestined to finish like it happened. I don't know, I have no answer whether Yugoslavia could have survived or not. But definitely it was not predestined to finish his 70-year-old life in a that tragic way. The war policy and the war resolution of the Yugoslav constitutional crisis was a pure invention of the politicians. Maybe things are not that simple even in that area. It is very difficult to say for any other single politician that he wanted war from the beginning. But in politics counts what you do. And if by your politics you pave the way each day to the war resolution of the conflict, that's it. And it is what happened. No side is just innocent. No side is without its part of the responsibility. But there is no any doubt that Milosevic rule in Serbia and his pan-Serbian nationalistic movement was probably the most responsible. By irony, Milosevic himself most probably was not a nationalist. He was a communist authoritarian ruler who ride the tiger of nationalism because it just served him best for the sake of power, to seek power. Responsibility actually can be put historically in the last generation of Tito's communists. Yugoslavia had never succeeded to invent a model that will last after Tito and can be transformed to some normal pluralistic democracy. We actually, it was interesting story. We borrowed the Swiss model of the balance of power, but we were not Switzerland. Our theoreticians of the Communist Party even were to Switzerland to search for this model of collective government. But in Switzerland it's quite normal that you don't know who is the president. The country is very wealthy, the everyday life is very good, well organized. Yugoslavia was not of that kind in the 90s. And for the authoritarian regimes, like Yugoslav was in one-party system, it was always a crucial the issue of the transfer of power. It is not for democracies. In democracies, transfer of power is automatic one. You go to elections and that's it. For authoritarian regime, if you don't find proper way to transfer power, the regime itself is coming under the threat. It happened in Yugoslavia. We invented the model of the ethnically based 6 republics and 2 provinces balance, with the 8-member presidency on the top. Central power was weaker and weaker, and in this decade after Tito's death, you had almost the open competition, like advertising in the newspaper. Which authoritarian leader will be brave and strong enough to say, okay, Tito is dead, I will try to be the next one. And Milosevic tried and failed, but Yugoslavia failed together with him. So it was the elite project. It was the elite project. It was the elite consequence, and it were the elite. There were the elites who decided to go for the war resolution conference. Yugoslavia was a country with the enormous number of mixed marriages, Bosnia especially. It is pure invention after the events that we hated each other. It's not true. There were some reminiscences of the World War II, but not dominant one. So I think that every scrupulous analysis would show that our elites from the, let's say, 70s to the, especially in the decade 80s and the 90s, produced all these calamities. That elite factor was crucial. Also showed the republics of former Yugoslavia that actually saved themselves. I mentioned Macedonia, for example, Slovenia too. Their communist elites, no matter that between that time President leader of Macedonia and President of Kučan, President of Slovenia, were almost 30 years different in age, or 20, and they belong to the different generations of communists. They de facto saved their countries by implementing very scrupulous policy to avoid the war at any cost. Someone may say that Slovenia and Macedonia were too beyond the reach of Milosevic war project, but not quite true. Not quite true. So, or take Montenegro. Our elite played a big role in turning against Milosevic after 6 years. It was the decision of the elite. With a solid ground. Okay, already 25 to 30% of Montenegrins regularly voted against Milosevic in the elections. But without the turnover in the ruling elite, it was not possible. So I don't think that elites decide on everything, but population is always to follow. And as in our case, the nationalistic propaganda was as strong that almost any nation in the world could not have resisted that kind of everyday pressure, that others are enemies, or others make you injustice sometime in the past, let's revenge now, or you know. I'm again going back to the German example. How we can explain otherwise that the population that granted to European culture enormous achievements. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Einstein, Thomas Mann, and many others are Germans. And the country fell to the almost barbarism in 10 years. It is not easy to explain, but by the elite factor, who seized power. As for Iraq, I don't claim to be any expert for the Middle East and the region. And it seems to me that Iraq is even more complicated case ethnically and religiously than we used to be. You have different ethnic groups, you have traditional division between Shia and Sunni in the Muslim community. You experienced pretty brutal regime, foreign intervention, war. It seems to me influence of Iran now, and that kind of a policy. And in my view, unfinished business in democracy, transition to normal democratic regime. On the other side, seems to me that it is still better than it was, let's say, 8 years ago or 7 years ago. On the other side, it is not to be neglected the factor that many other Arab nations now opted to the different kind of Arab Spring. So the democracy as a model is not anymore the exception in the Arab world. It's becoming more and more embraced, model that should be embraced. And I only do hope that what you mentioned, that the second civil war is not going to happen, and that you will find some other way to resolve your pretty complicated institutional and ethnical religious issues in the country.
I'm for one, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, please?
Thanks. Thank you very much for your comments today. They're very interesting. My name is Lise Howard. I'm a professor of government at Georgetown University. And this year, I'm a senior fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace on a fellowship at USIP. So I have a couple of questions, and I'll try to keep it brief. I have many questions, but I'll ask two. So in the United States, as you were saying, U.S. identity is based on individual political rights, civic national identity. And one of the basic principles is that somebody who doesn't look like you or share your religion or your gender can represent you, or your age, or any other kind of category can represent you. But this idea has not always translated into U.S. foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in Iraq, I often see that we have an American categorization
and it will serve us well.
Thank you very much.
And it is the case of of any single Balkan states, and there is no anyone that at the moment refrains itself from the EU membership. Serbia was granted candidacy a few days ago, and it was the last good news, what we all praise in the region.
Thank you very much for participating in this discussion. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.